Welcome everybody to the uh, news shows of 2023 voted to be the best, most astute political analysis on the internet by the New York Times, PBS, and NPR. 2 years, amazingly, 2 straight years we've won that award. And I just feel good. I feel good to be a part of the liberal establishment finally, after spending my whole life knocking on it, being shoved to the ground by it. Now they love us. No, I'm making that up. We live in a different world, man, than those people. When I read the New York Times and I listen to NPR, except on Gaza, the NPR like half the time on Gaza is speaks my language, but in the rest of the time it's about white supremacy and Trump the Nazi, and it's wild. That's where I come from, that world. Anyway,
Did you see the New York Times piece on Google's AI?
no.
Oh, okay. I'm getting an echo on your end. Let me try something here. Is that better? Test, test, test.
What happened?
Okay. Yeah, Google's OpenAI. If you've been seeing on Twitter, what is it? Google Gemini is the name of their new AI platform, and
Oh, right.
it's the most politically correct AI platform ever devised.
Someone put in a search for, what they say, show me 4 NHL players, and it came back a picture of like a Mexican woman with a mask on in hockey pads. Again, it was like, happens all the time.
Yeah, so it's funny. What it does is, apparently there is a problem with AI, like generating the same generic white dude over and over again. And so to give Google the benefit of the doubt and some other AI programs the benefit of the doubt, it inputs into your prompt from diverse backgrounds, like from racially diverse backgrounds or whatever. But you know, you ask for a Roman emperor and it shows you a black lady, or it shows you ask for like a Scottish soldier and it shows you a Chinese transgender. Like,
right, it's all Hamilton.
Yeah, it's
Hamilton and
history.
And what was the TV show? Same thing. Bridgerton.
Yeah.
Bridgerton, same idea. Yeah. Everybody in the past was actually black, which has always been the strangest thing. We've talked about this before to me, but like the politics of that just have never made any sense to me whatsoever, except that it means to me that the most shallow forms of identity representation are all that matters to most Americans. Right? If you can just put a black face on the founding fathers, we now feel better about all of American history. We can now dance to it. Yeah, same with Bridgerton. It's like, if you can make the kings and queens into black people, or just put black faces on them, then we're no longer upset about our past. Is that it? We now feel good about the whole thing. That's it. It's that level. It's like a 13-year-old girl's politics.
And
everybody needs to be everybody needs to be invited to the party.
Yeah, so a fun game to do is to go on Google Gemini and try to create a white person. It might take hours, but
right. Show me a white person.
Yeah, but
who comes up like Hitler, Klansman? Who comes up when you do that?
When you do that. Well, yeah, and that's the funny thing is like negative stereotypes. Like if
Harvey Weinstein.
If you ask Google Gemini to create like a picture of somebody eating fried chicken, that'll be white. If you ask somebody to create a picture of somebody eating watermelon, create a guilty man. If you have the process of guilty man, the prompt of guilty man, they're all white.
Right.
Anything negative is automatically white.
Right. So, which leads us to perhaps a discussion about one of the most fascinating and entertaining things I've seen in the news in a long, long time, which was the testimony of one Fani Willis. Fani, I think it is. Fani Willis.
Quick, the New York Times had an article that just came out saying that the real problem with this is not that the harm it does to white people. It is the problem that if you ask it to create soldiers from World War II in Germany, it'll put people of color as Nazis. And so the harm that this is doing to people of color is the real problem here. And that's where the outrage comes from. That's
Yeah, that would do a lot of damage to black people to be compared to Nazis. I'm not sure they could come back from that. I have noticed that Israelis, and I don't want to go to that subject yet, but I have noticed that Israelis get especially upset about that when they get compared to Nazis. That's when they start actually crying. I don't know if you've noticed that.
Oh. Have you seen Life of Brian? Remember Life of Brian?
Sure.
Yeah. Python? The one joke that was cut from that movie by whatever execs was there was a Star of David, like army stylized as a swastika that came to there was like these Jewish nationalists in that movie that were stylized after Nazis, making the obvious irony joke about that. But
there's again, don't want to divert down this lane too far, but like there is a longer and deeper tradition in the UK of whatever you want to call it. Well, anti-Zionism, basically, like opposition to Israel, solidarity with Palestine, whatever flavor of that you prefer. Like it's because it was a British colony, and of course the Brits are the original cause of the fucking thing to happen, the original reason that Israel exists. But yeah, I mean, and by the way, if you can hear my voice right now and you are a fan of sort of any part of the IDW, if you like certain libertarians of the reason variety, if you these are all like Hitchens lineage, by the way. Sam Harris crew, Weinstein's, the Fifth Column guys are all huge Hitchens fans. I used to teach in the same classroom at Christopher Hitchens at the New School many years ago. He would bring, and this is, I love him for this, he'd bring like a glass this big full of, I guess, gin or whiskey. I think it was brown whiskey.
Yeah.
He drank gin too, but like into class every time. He'd walk, we'd cross through the door together, and he'd have that glass. As if you know anything about Hitchens and politics in recent years, he very infamously became a hawk on Islam, leader of the New Atheists, which meant ultimately politically go to war with Islam, which meant very, very aggressive support of the war on terror, the Iraq War, and all of it. However, his lineage, his children, who I'm friends with many of them, and Hitchens was brilliant. He was right about a lot of stuff, but his children, I have noticed, are all pro-Israel, anti-ceasefire, right down the line. Well, if you are a fan and you're listening to my voice of any of those people, if you like Christopher Hitchens, if you're interested in what he has to say, someone who was arguably the most important public intellectual supporting the war on terror, there's a wonderful reel on YouTube. I think it's on Twitter too. You can find it easily, I think, of Hitchens's views on the state of Israel and Zionism, the whole idea of a Jewish state in Israel. Dude had exactly my politics when it came to Israel. He says straight up, stupid idea. He said he's always been opposed to it. He said, I think it's always been a stupid idea. And his mother was a Zionist. I didn't know this, and she tried to get the Hitchens boys to move there and to do the whole Aliyah thing, and they refused. And I think Peter too, his brother, is also an anti-Zionist. But there's several really amazing speeches by Hitchens against the whole idea of the state of Israel, and he has exactly the right politics of it on it. He also says, okay, now, unfortunately, we have many generations of Israelis, so an anti-Zionist doesn't mean you want to eliminate those people from the face of the earth. But the whole idea to begin with was a bad one. Anyway, yeah, Hitchens. Go check out Hitchens on Zionism. There's a fabulous reel. It's like 10 minutes long. Anyway, we were on Hitchens. Sorry. How'd you get me to Hitchens? British intellectuals.
British.
Sorry.
Oh, yeah. British anti-Zionism. With Monty Python.
Oh, right. Bingo. Right. And so Hitchens is a part of that tradition of that rich, I would call it tradition, deep, longer. And it's longer because, again, they started back in the 1917 with the Balfour Declaration. Yeah, I mean, you get like you'll see like Vanessa Redgrave, if you're older, very famous actress. I mean, she was like hardcore anti-Zionist and she was really loud about it. And she was the biggest actress pretty much in the UK for much of the like 60s and 70s and 80s. It's like a major position to take in the UK, and you'll get a lot of support for it. However, at the same time, and this is something that Max Blumenthal's been talking about, and he's right, we need to start connecting Ukraine and Israel, these issues, and like why particular people take particular sides, right? It's not always obvious. In the UK, you do have a very powerful anti-Zionist, anti-Israel tradition that runs right through the Labour Party, like one of the major parties. A lot. Jeremy Corbyn was the most famous example of this. He got punished for it, but the fact that he was almost prime minister tells you. And Jeremy Corbyn is as anti-Zionist as Max Blumenthal is, and he almost became prime minister. At the same time, and this is really very relevant to today's news, or what's going on in London today. In the UK at the same time, and I haven't completely figured this out, and this is a really interesting thing, they are as rabid anti-Putin Russophobe freaks as any neocon in the United States. In the UK, to be pro-Ukraine and anti-Russian is like way more normal and common than it is even in the United States. Much more. Like we have much more of an opposition to NATO and the American empire and all it represents here than the UK does, and Western Europe too. So there are quite a few people I've seen who are pro-Ukraine and pro-Gaza and pro-Palestine. And that's the one that Max wants to attack, that particular nexus. And I think he's right. Like, who the fuck is that? They support the expansion of NATO. They support ultimately, and what it means now, by the way, is the dissolution of the state of Russia. I said this a few months ago when we were still talking about Ukraine. And I'm going to say this again. Everybody, please go look up, just Google on YouTube, Google anywhere, the words Russia and decolonization. The think tanks are back at it. They've been talking about this for months now. This is one of their top main proposals that they are putting forward to the State Department over and over again. We need to decolonize Russia, which means break up Russia into various stands, Bantu stands. The claim being that Imperial Russia, formed more than 100 years ago originally, is an empire made up of various ethnicities that were forced together, which is essentially true, sure. But you could say that about most countries, and certainly the United States. They're calling for the breaking up of those states into Russia. Now, in the United States, I'm all for that. I'm a decentralist, but I happen to live in the United States, so this is like where I live, and so I think I should have a say over it. The idea that people in Washington, D.C., in office buildings, in think tanks, on K Street, with a direct line to the State Department, are making plans actively to decolonize your country, to break apart your country, means only one thing. I mean, they're either going to act through agents, military subversive agents within Russia, or it's some kind of external military operation, that the West would do. That's the long-term plan and has been against Russia since the breakup of the Soviet Union. We know this. They've said this in many ways, many places, that they want to go in, take out the government, take out Putin, and break that country up so that it no longer poses a threat to the hegemony of the United States of America. So this is why Julian Assange has been in Belmarsh prison, which is apparently the worst, harshest prison, maximum security prison in all of the UK. And he's been in solitary confinement for much of that time, for I think 5 years now. And now this is from his family and his lawyers, but we have not seen Julian Assange in years. He has not been in front of the cameras in years. And what they say is that his mental state has deteriorated to such a place that he can't even watch the video proceedings of his hearings. So he's been held in Belmarsh for various reasons in the UK, and before that he was in the Ecuadorian residence and consulate embassy in London. So he's been basically under some form of arrests, by the state, basically for a decade. And the U.S. under the Trump administration, it was the Trump administration, and people need to be clear about this, because actually most of MAGA is pro Assange. Like Robert Barnes, I'm a big fan of Robert Barnes. I think he's the smartest MAGA intellectual. He is the biggest Assange fan there is, and you've got, of course, the entire left. The serious left is super pro Assange. You've got all the realists, the Duran dudes, all those guys. It's a huge coalition for Assange. The Biden administration, though, continued the prosecution that Trump began against Assange. So it's, of course, bipartisan. No shit. But MAGA, number one, you need to call out your boy for this, because MAGA is generally, I would say, I don't know about Bannon, but in general, MAGA is sort of sympathetic to Assange. Because what did he do? He blew the whistle on the DNC, on Hillary Clinton's emails. I mean, that was him. He was responsible basically for that. Not that we found out that much, but, just that he would. And he also identified, and this is really important, I think. One of the things that I think was thrilling about Assange when he was still, a sentient being and not a vegetable tortured into submission by the state, was that he was calling out the correct actors, culprits in the expansion of the American empire, which is not the Republicans. God damn it, you fucking idiots! It's not the Bushies. Too stupid for that. It's the Democrats. Assange said over and over and over again, the American empire is a Democratic Party creation, and they are the ones primarily engaged in maintaining it. Not exclusively. Of course, the Bushies and some Republicans and McCain and all the rest have been huge imperialists, no doubt about it. But it's a Democratic Party liberal endeavor, the American empire, which, when someone says that, I get very fond of them. And Assange said that over and over again, and he was right. And I think that is why you have so many MAGA basically supporting him. And that is why he probably will never see freedom, because he's pissed off Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama and John Podesta and the people who run the government. Notice people who run the government, the deep state, of course. The permanent bureaucracies, all Democrats. We know that. They hate Julian Assange's motherfucking guts. And that extends into the judiciary. You think the clerks who went to Chicago and Yale Law and now work for some fucking judge in the federal judiciary think that they love Julian Assange? No, they all vote for Hillary Clinton. They have been trained to hate his guts and think of him as nothing but a Putin puppet. So they'll do everything they can to keep his ass in prison until he dies. However, the UK, the Trump administration, Biden, might have made a bit of an error. Here. Because in the UK, as I said, there is basically almost unanimity around Russia and Putin and Assange. They hate him. It's very hard to find a Brit who has any kind of sensible idea about those things. The whole rest of the world, by the way, is totally pro Assange and knows what's going on. It's an interesting thing. If you read the press in any other country, even in Western Europe, France, you'll see lots of people who know exactly what's going on with Assange. In the British press, it's incredible. It's much worse than here. The uniformity, which is why he's been in Belmarsh for whatever it is, 5 or 6 years, and sees there's no hope. And partly because there's no constitution, no Bill of Rights, no First Amendment in the UK. That's part of it. But it's more, I think, that particular ideological commitment to the American empire by the UK that it has made since it relinquished control of the world to the United States in 1945. Almost formally said, okay, here you go, it's yours, and we will be your partner in this, in maintaining this thing. That's why Julian Assange is where he is. So, by seeking his extradition, which the US has been seeking, first with Trump, now with Biden, and he's going to lose this hearing, probably. And everyone says that. I mean, I haven't followed it that closely, but everyone close to it. I mean, his fans say he's going to lose this hearing and he's going to get extradited like within weeks. He's going to get sent here to the United States and get put on trial inside the United States. Now, do we really think, remember what I just said about the pro-Julian Assange coalition? Everybody from MAGA Trump people to communists love this guy and will fight and die and bleed for him. And the protests surrounding the courthouses and the prisons, it's going to be huge. And we are going to have a serious debate because Glenn Greenwald will not let this go. Robert Barnes will not let this go. Jack Posobiec will not let this go. It's going to get on the War Room. It's going to get on Democracy Now! Every single day. They've been reporting on this every day for a decade. The left, the right is going to go crazy on this and come together. And it's going to be one of the biggest coalitions ever. And the United States is going to be very, very embarrassed, basically torturing to death an old man at this point who revealed war crimes, which is what he did. He revealed war crimes, and he also said, hey, with this new technology we have, that the people now have, you governments no longer can conduct your foreign policies in secret. We will find out what you're doing. And some of us, he said, will report it. And the first of us, you will put in prison forever until we die. And the rest, though, will continue, which is exactly what's happened. So, all of which is to say, him, and most likely he's going to lose this, and assuming he's going to get extradited, it's going to be a good thing. I'm not saying it's going to get him off. I'm not saying he will be acquitted. Although I actually think when they extradite him, I think there will be I would possibly bet money that he will actually walk eventually. Because we actually, amazingly, in the United States, have a much bigger, more robust anti-imperialist culture than the UK does. The UK has almost none. We got a big one. And since Trump came along in 2016, it's gotten 4 times bigger because we added the right wing to our team. So every dissident, like what Icarus Festival represents, opposition to the establishment, the people who run the government and run the major cultural institutions, every dissident who is opposed to that regime, from the left to the right, is a Julian Assange fan. That's another thing that reunites all of us. All of us. Whatever we think about drag queens or Muslims, we all agree that Julian Assange should be free and that he represents an existential threat to the imperial security state that all of us on the dissident side of politics hate. And this is why it's that important. So when he comes here, there's going to be a big ass movement with all sorts of people involved in it, all sorts of people who normally hate each other, kind of like the pro-Palestine movement. I hate most of these commies who run these protests for Gaza. Hate them. They're grotesque, but they're the only people who are doing this. Same with Assange. It's going to be a wild menagerie coalition, but it's going to be big. And we are at least going to make some major points about freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and most importantly, the very character of the Democratic Party and the liberal establishment that was responsible for all of these things. So I say, bring it on, extradite him, bring him here. We will have that fight in this country, and we might win. How's that for a speech?
Nice, yeah. So you think he'll have his day in court in the United States, and you think it'll play out?
I mean, that I don't know. I'm just going off of what experts I listen to say, like people who are on both sides of it say, oh yeah, he's probably going to get extradited. Alexander Mercurius takes basically my position on this. He thinks it's probably a good thing, but he doesn't understand American politics as well since he's in London. And so he doesn't see how big it is, the coalition here for Assange. Like it's huge, man. Like, right? I mean, everybody on our side, whether they think about him or not, if asked, would be completely for Julian Assange, I think. I mean, so yeah. No, he's going to get extradited. I don't know what physical shape he's in though, because the word is that he can't even sit up straight, and they're not really saying this, but it sort of sounds like he's gone crazy. He's lost his mind, which, 10 years in confinement and 5 years in a max prison is going to do that.
Well, that's the main argument. Well, one of them that they're making about him not being extradited is that he's in no condition to be extradited, that he's a threat to himself, potentially.
Yeah, that was the argument. Yeah, that was the last ruling by a British judge, which was to stop the extradition, which is that I think she said she feared it was either suicide or that the conditions in the U.S. prisons would be so bad that he would die. Yeah, no, but the thing is, I think we want him extradited. I'm sure of it, actually. I'm positive. I mean, we just, believe it or not, everybody, we have a far better political culture than the UK does. I mean, if you don't believe me, just go visit and see. But I mean, especially on these issues, anything to do with Russia, which Assange is now completely connected to, they are psychos.
And you think Trump prosecuting Assange was another fallout of Russiagate, that Trump had to be reflexively hawkish on Russia and hawkish on foreign policy?
That almost definitely was Mike Pompeo's doing. Mike Pompeo. So here's a good one. And this is from Yahoo News. Okay, this is like from 2 years ago, I think. Mike Isikoff. Yahoo News, all right? Mainstream as shit. Like, this was their piece. This was their reporting. Mike Pompeo, when he was head of CIA under Trump, authored, drafted, came up with plans. This is from Yahoo News, everybody. To kidnap Assange, and if that didn't work, assassinate Assange. The assassination plan apparently never went up to Trump, but the kidnapping plan did and was discussed in the White House. I think this is the story. I know that the CIA launched a full-on assault on WikiLeaks and on Assange, like a full-on assault to subvert, discredit, prosecute, and ultimately, physically harm WikiLeaks after WikiLeaks revealed some major cache of data that the CIA controlled that Pompeo got furious about, and he wanted revenge, and he wanted to make a statement against WikiLeaks. And that's when he hatched these plans to kidnap and or assassinate Assange. And then to, of course, associate them and go on a full propaganda campaign to tie them to Russia and Putin and all the rest of it and call for his prosecution. And I mean, Pompeo is a huge player in this. So I was answering your question about where it came from, or for your question, but that's the origin of this.
What motivated Trump to prosecute Assange?
Oh, Trump. Yeah. So like Trump, right. Now the question there is really like, why did Trump decide to hire these fucks like Pompeo and Bolton when he had clearly I would not say anti-imperialist, but like non-imperialist. That's what Trump is. He's a non-imperialist. He just doesn't think that way, but he's not necessarily like going to tear down all the bases either tomorrow. But why would someone who's like skeptical of NATO, against regime change, doesn't like doing occupations, was against the Iraq war, why would he hire these people like Mike Pompeo, who's just a smarter John Bolton, by the way, and a more charismatic one? Pompeo's got chops as a politician. He watch this guy. He was thinking about running for president for a minute there. Like I don't know if he could do that, but he can make he could do some damage because he's got some politician's chops. Yeah, why did he hire these people? And why did he let Jared Kushner, his dipshit son-in-law, dictate Middle East policy to him? The Abraham Accords, which is, possibly the most proximate cause of October 7th, by the way, in terms of policy that the United States ever did, because it cut out the Palestinians and made this deal among all the Arab states with the U.S. that completely ignored Gaza and Palestine. And the message was sent that like Saudi, Qatar, all these countries are just gonna like, we don't care about the Palestinians. And in other words, so Hamas saw that as like an announcement that the Arab nations were not going to help them ever, and that they had to go it alone. That was Jared Kushner's idea. That was his whole program. And then the whole deal with the Saudis that Trump made, huge arms deal. The Yemen war with the Saudis, through the Saudis, that was Jared. Apparently, I mean, the moving the embassy to Jerusalem, that was Jared. Jared, whose family was close with the Netanyahu family. I mean, like, why? I think it's just, I guess it's because Trump is a fucking dude who had a TV show and a real estate company and like didn't know all the ins and outs of, US foreign policy, like almost everyone. And so he kind of relied on people he thought were impressive. And for whatever goddamn reason, he thought his daughter's dipshit husband knew a lot about Israel because he was Jewish or something. I don't know. Or because he knew Bibi Netanyahu. I mean, I would imagine that's what happened. What's her face brought him home, and he's like, Trump's grilling Jared, and he finds out that, and of course, Jared like immediately starts dropping names about how he like grew up with Bibi Netanyahu, who slept in his bed as a child when he would visit, and he would stay at the Kushner's house. And I could see Trump. I could just see him being like, "Oh, that's impressive. You should run my Israel policy when I'm president."
I remember the last like month or so of Trump's presidency, everybody was pushing a huge campaign for him to pardon Assange, pardon Snowden, even Ulbricht, and that never came to any fruition.
Nope.
Yeah, even Obama in his last month pardoned Chelsea Manning.
Chelsea Manning. Yep.
Yeah.
Chelsea Manning, who has renounced Glenn Greenwald. She has announced the whole dissident left that basically kept her alive. I mean, got her out of prison. She's renounced all that because they're, not Democrat enough, capital D. Julian Assange, his critique of the Democratic Party as being the center and the origin of the American empire is really what I think is most important about him. And I think it's also why he's facing the biggest enemy there is outside of the Marvel universe. Like, he's facing the Hillary Clinton Democratic Party, baby. And I'm not talking about assassinations and shit. I'm not talking about Vince Foster and stuff like that. I'm just talking about the power that those people wield in all the institutions, in the legal apparatus, in the courts, in the Congress, in the where, anywhere. In the media, which is the most important thing, the Hillary Clinton Democrats, those people, and I know them well, and I personally have very close relationships with many people there who are powerful. I know. I mean, they don't even, and they're so powerful, they will crush you without even knowing it. Like, they'll just sort of breathe, and next thing you know, you're like out of a career on the street, your name is tarnished, and they're like, oh, did we say something about?
Yeah, I remember also after the DNC emails got leaked, there was a huge like 180-degree turn on a lot of liberals with Julian Assange. Like, they liked him for exposing Bush's war crimes, and then immediately they thought he was some sort of Putin stooge, some sort of. They thought he was what the neocon said he was, some foreign asset bent on destroying the United States.
Don't fuck with mommy. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's what that was. It was, there's tribalisms in politics, which are horrible and terrible, and everyone should always avoid any kind of tribalistic feelings when it comes to politics. It'll get you and other people killed real fast. Democratic Party tribalism is the saddest shit in the world. I mean, they are, Idi Amin, like, he had some charisma, and he like developed, and he like, he actually produced social welfare programs that actually put some like porridge in some bowls in the peasant villages in Uganda, actually gave some shit to some people. You're engaging in a cult of personality around Hillary Clinton, and you will abrogate every principle you have to protect Hillary Clinton? Not just Hillary Clinton, to protect her political ambitions? I'm mostly right now talking about my ex-wife, so everyone can just take that for what it's worth. No, it's not just her, it's a lot of people. And it just, wow, even educated people. So Democratic Party tribalism, yes, when Julian Assange went after Hillary, but really after the DNC, to expose them as, again, as the center of the American empire that's ultimately responsible for why we were in Iraq, why we were in Yemen, why we're killing people in Gaza. Yeah, you can trace all of that back to the Democrats. Israel policy began with Lyndon Baines Johnson. He started all this. That's when you're right. They were like, okay, fuck this dude.
And that was the first time I heard the term misinformation be brought into the mainstream.
Yeah.
That whole PSYOP now that is the number one priority of the World Economic Forum and all those people is.
Yeah, man. And then, so I remember that moment really well. That was about 5-6 years ago. And misinformation came out as this term all of a sudden. This was also with Russiagate. Is all part of the same moment. And the thing that I saw, and I really wish I was going to pitch this to Reason or somebody, I was going to write a piece about this. I saw then 5 years ago, like all these academic centers and institutes spring up, like in 2017, 2018, 2019, Stanford, MIT, Berkeley, Harvard, Columbia, all of a sudden, they all had these misinformation research institutes or whatever. And I looked into them, and of course, they were just all doing State Department work. All just doing basically anti-Russia propaganda work. Like these are the major universities being funded by federal money, doing actively, propaganda work to essentially prolong a war, which is the long war against Russia. But yeah, it was all connected right there. It was all such a massive fraud, but it was all a fraud in the service of the American empire, extending the American empire into Russia, decolonizing Russia, destroying the Russian government, the Russian state as it has existed for centuries, by the way. That is the goal. The Russian state, as it has been constituted for centuries, the basic contours of it, that's what they want to destroy. And they're straight up about it. That's what Russiagate was all about. It wasn't about there was a two-pronged objective with Russiagate. It was to destroy Russia, not Putin, Russia. This is why people in Russia are willing to go to war over this, because they understand that these people who run U.S. foreign policy are about that. They're about a civil war inside Russia. That's what they want to create. A civil war that will break Russia up so that it no longer exists as the Russia that we've known for centuries. That's what this was all about. That's what Russia, and then getting Trump, the bad orange man who's like anti-NATO, sort of anti-NATO. You get two birds with one stone with Russiagate. And so you concoct the biggest fraud in American political history, world history, possibly. And they're still talking as if it was real.
Well, and that's the Orwellian shell game with the term misinformation, because when everything Assange had was being leaked, I think the definition of misinformation was not necessarily information that is untrue, but information that could be negatively weaponized against the U.S. empire.
Yeah, I mean, every time I read an article about misinformation, it was always about Russian propaganda, right? So anything that coincided with Russian propaganda, whatever, the line from the Russian government about anything, about the Ukraine war, about NATO, about whatever, if you ever said anything that coincided with what they were saying, then that's considered anything that is consistent with the Russian political line is deemed misinformation. So you're not allowed to wage any kind of critique. This is the same thing that's going on with Gaza and Israel, right? The Israeli government, through Hasbara, through its whole propaganda machine in the United States, has basically made it, or tried to make it, impossible to make critiques of the state of Israel or of Zionism by calling it anti-Semitic. Same thing. They're trying to sort of disallow critiques of the empire, of U.S. foreign policy. Max Blumenthal, yeah, he said this on their lives on the Gray Zone live stream, I think last week, and I really kind of struck me like, it's not a coincidence that some of us are opposed to funding Ukraine and funding Israel, which is really what the bottom line is. That's the coalition. You don't have to be pro-Palestine. You don't have to be you certainly don't have to be pro-Russia. That's all it is. You're just opposed to the U.S. funding those things. This is for Americans. This is what I'm talking about here. What is that a coincidence that we choose that side on those two conflicts? No. This is the anti-imperialist movement. That's who this is. If you are opposed to the American empire, you would take those two positions because that's what those two conflicts represent most importantly to us, and we think should be to the world. That's the way people should look at this, because that's what it is. Israel was created as an imperialist outpost, first by the UK, then by the United States. They fucking said it. Same with Ukraine. Very clear that they wanted to use Ukraine against Russia, and they've said this in various ways. We know this, right? And this is why we are opposed to supporting Ukraine and supporting Israel, because we see both of those entities as the tip of the spear of imperialist aggression against other peoples, against other countries, whether it's Russia or the people of Gaza or the people of the West Bank. Aggression that is not just inhumane and maybe immoral and brutal and vicious and, let's follow the golden rule maybe, but destabilizes the entire world and makes us all in danger, because it turns out that, people don't like it and get very angry when they suffer aggression from world superpowers. And they want to do crazy shit like, kill civilians and send rockets into cities and fly airplanes into buildings and God knows. So yeah, this is Gaza and Ukraine are the two fronts, the two sort of hot fronts right now of what's now shaping up to be, and this is getting kind of wild, but this is what it is really looking like. The two hot fronts of the war against the U.S. empire, which we haven't really seen in a possibly coordinated fashion ever. Like Vietnam was an anti-U.S. empire war, but it was pretty much the Vietnamese on their own. Now you have Iran, you have Iranian militias, you have the Yemeni, the Houthis, that's like million. They're having 4 or 5 million people in the street. There's Hezbollah in the north, Hamas in the south. And then there are people who are seeing the connection between Ukraine and Israel. And in fact, it was, who said it? Someone, I think not Zelensky, but some like, was it Lindsey Graham or some pro-Ukrainian senator, I think, said that Ukraine should become the Israel of Europe for us, meaning the imperial outpost, the fortress, the stronghold, the forward operating base for the U.S. empire in Europe. So, and we wonder why this week there were on planet Earth 2 places where there were fields of rotting corpses: Gaza and Avdiivka in Ukraine. Many, many reports from Avdiivka. We can talk about that. The final stand of the Ukrainians trying to hold on to the village from which they bombarded civilians in Donetsk for 10 years. Russia finally conquered Avdiivka, destroyed that fortress that they had established from which, as I said, to bombard civilians. But apparently that battle wasn't going on for months. It was Ukraine retreated and then refought and came back in and took it over briefly, and Russia had to do another route of them. And apparently the stench from rotting corpses is so great that a lot of the soldiers have deserted simply because of that. Simply because of the smell. They can't handle it because there's so many bodies in Avdiivka. And this is, I have not heard a report like this in the entire Ukrainian war. And we are talking about the Ukrainian war. We were talking about Bakhmut. We were talking about Mariupol. We were talking about lots and lots of horrible battles. Apparently, the extended battle of Avdiivka, which is, I think has just ended yesterday, has resulted in fields of bodies. What you see from the Battle of Gettysburg, what you see from the Battle of the Marne, what you see from the Battle of Palau in the Pacific, what you see from, I mean, I could go on. You guys get my picture. Like Cambodia, the killing fields of Cambodia, Quang Tri, fields of bodies. Right now, one in Europe and one in Israel, basically. And guess which entity is responsible for both of those? Guess which entity produced the weapons that cut through all those bodies? Almost entirely US made, everybody. Those fields of bodies, I will promise you, the bullets, the bombs, the artillery shells, the tank shells, made in Washington State, Indiana, California, Rhode Island, Georgia. I mean, it's congratulations, everybody. This is what it looks like on the way out, huh? The American Empire on the way out. We're going to take a lot of people with us. Fuck you all. We've had a run for about 200 years, 100 years, 150 years. If you're going to kick us off the world stage, we're going to take a lot of you fucks with us. And we don't care if you're brown in Gaza or white as shit in Russia. We're just going to take a lot. I don't know. But that's what's... People need to understand there's fields of rotting corpses in 2 places in the world, and we're responsible for it right now.
Well, that's... I forget who was saying it. Somebody on Fox News when they were talking about the funding for Ukraine and how there's all this Republican opposition to it because we're sending money abroad, was saying, no, we're not sending money abroad. All this money is going to Lockheed Martin and Raytheon. Like, it's staying right. It's homegrown American, baby. It's great for our economy.
Connecticut, I forgot. I think that's Lockheed. Is Lockheed Connecticut? I think so. It's one of the New England states. Yeah. Yeah, that was a great argument. I heard that many people made that argument about Gaza too. Like, people understand. I think it was Bill Kristol. That was Bill Kristol on his podcast. He was talking about exactly what you just said. Americans don't understand that this is a boon for our economy. It's for our people. That money does not go to Israel. It goes to Lockheed Martin and the jobs there and the wages for those people making the bombs that kill the children. That's clearly a win, says someone representing no one except the foreign policy. I mean, that's the amazing thing. It's like about 100 people running the world, and the rest of us either don't know they exist or are totally opposed to them and want to kill them. It's an amazing thing. This cabal, which is about 150 years old, same families, same schools and neighborhoods producing these people who run American foreign policy, meaning they run the world. You can look at the lineages, not just the Roosevelts and the Kennedys. I mean, it's just one after the other. Juniors, seniors, the third, the fourth, the fifth, the Roosevelts alone. Kermit Roosevelt was Teddy's grandson, I think. Is that right? And he's the one who ran the overthrow of Mossadegh in Iran in the 1950s, which gave rise to basically the entire war on terror and in the Iraq war. You could argue was traced back to that. That was like 50 years after Teddy Roosevelt. That was his son, Kermit, or grandson. I think it might have been his son. And it's just one. And the Kennedys, good God, it's like, and now their latest dude turns out works for Israel. Bobby Jr. We all thought, oh, he's Mr. Anti-Establishment. And I said, don't trust this cat. Do not. He's a Kennedy, number one. Don't ever trust a Kennedy. And I just didn't trust him on especially foreign policy. He said some stuff that was shaky about the history of the Democratic Party, about how they've always been the party of freedom and peace. And I'm like, oh, if you think that, then you're going to have some very bad opinions about foreign policy. And sure enough, next thing he says is Israel's awesome and has always done right, and we should support them.
I've got the clip of Dave Smith grilling him on that and the giant long pregnant pause. If you saw that,
I didn't.
I don't agree with that. But okay, do you have concerns about the level of Israeli influence in our politics here in the United States of America?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I'm not, I'm not a politician in political office, so I don't see much of that.
Dave's face when he says, "I'm not a politician." I'm like, aren't you from a family that might know some politicians?
I'm just like,
yeah, no,
I don't know anything about these people in Washington. I'm just, yeah.
So, like, anybody who's been following, have you seen Rabbi Shmuley?
I saw him. Who was he debating? Was it him, Piers
Finkelstein.
Morgan, and
Finkelstein? Yeah, that was wild. So Shmuley is now completely off the rails and just like launches into ad hominem attacks whenever he debates now. He kind of tried to have sort of an argument before, but the guy is so embarrassing. I actually was going to say something on my Twitter about, like, I bet Hamas is paying him, because he has discredited Israel more than anybody I've ever seen. He is such an embarrassment. But he's the most embarrassing pro-Israel shill in the United States. That's kind of what his job is. He was Kennedy's co-manager for his campaign. Think he still is. Like, Rabbi Shmuley was like Kennedy's guy. That's who we're talking about here. There's something about Israel that has the fucking, I don't fully understand. And I'm seeing it in some friends of mine, who are Gentiles, who are, public intellectuals, journalists, and they have this weird affection for Israel that makes them stupid and irrational about it. And I think it's from, like, the bars in Tel Aviv apparently are really great. And, the legendary hot chicks, which I think might be inflated for propaganda purposes, how hot they are. But yeah, there's some weird thing, like, why would the Kennedys have this romantic attachment to the state of Israel? Why would certain people at Reason Magazine, who are not Jewish, have romantic? Jews shouldn't have romantic attachments to the state of Israel. Hardly any Jews I've known, and I've known thousands, hardly any of them gave a shit about Israel. We never talked about it. I knew like 2 or 3 people who ever went there, ever cared. No one cared about Israel. No Jews in America care about Israel, hardly. But there's this sort of subset of Gentile sort of intellectuals in the US who kind of run things, who have this soft spot or boner or whatever you want to call it for the Jewish state. And I don't get it. Is it just because, like, is it the Sam Harris reason that he just hates Muslims so much that anybody who kills Muslims is all right with him? Is that, I don't get it. Like, well, really, what the fuck is that? Why do they care?
Well, I mean, there's definitely something duplicitous going on with RFK Jr. because he plays stupid about it. Like, he isn't willing to admit that at least there's an outsized political influence in DC that represents Israel, that there's dual citizens in Congress, that there's a fanatical devotion to this at every level. That he's not even willing to acknowledge that shows something duplicitous happening.
I don't know what the number is, but it's in the thousands, I think. There are thousands of US citizens currently in the IDF fighting in Gaza.
Yeah.
Like, like what? And that's cool. Okay. Yeah, no, the Israel thing. So a lot of people, so if you're a dumb right winger, you would say, oh, the Jews control our minds because they control the media, which is 50% correct. like why then there's the Holocaust thing, which is Norm Finkelstein's whole career is about showing how Zionists and Israel used the Holocaust to manipulate public opinion among Gentiles, especially in America, to support the state of Israel, using guilt about the Holocaust. And so, you know, you can't. My father, who was a total Gentile, the Jew is my mother. My dad, who was a complete Gentile, like he would cry about the Holocaust. He would start talking about the Holocaust decades later and start crying about it and had powerful feelings about it. And I know that's true for I've known a lot of Gentiles like that. The Holocaust Industry is the book that Norman Finkelstein wrote about this, about how the state of Israel got that into our heads. Not that the Holocaust didn't happen, not that it wasn't terrible, not that it wasn't, you know, maybe the biggest crime of the 20th century, although I don't think it was necessarily. In fact, I don't think it was. I think there were plenty of crimes in the 20th century that were at least equal to it. That seems indisputable to me. So why do we have such an intense feeling about this one thing? And why is it the Holocaust? Are you crazy? There have been so many Holocausts. Just in the last 50 years, there have been multiple Holocausts. There's one going on right now, for gosh sake. And you could even say in Ukraine. I think for parts of Ukraine, I think Donetsk, which we got to talk about, that's a Holocaust. So yeah, check out Norm Finkelstein's first book. It's the book that put him on the map. It's what got him into trouble. It's what made him who he is. It's pretty short too. It's a great book. But that's why all these stupid, dumbass Gentiles, some of whom have very popular podcasts, support what Israel's doing, because they have this just sort of sentimental attachment to the Jewish state because of the Holocaust, because of Holocaust guilt.
Because they were shown, well, yeah, they were shown Schindler's List in history class.
Oh, that's the begin. That's just the beginning. Yeah. I mean, Shoah. If you're older, Shoah. Like, Shoah, I mean, God, yeah. The whole. I mean, every year the fucking Oscars would give at least one award to a Holocaust movie. That was the joke, right? And you know, I was like married into kind of a Hollywood family, so I knew this. And she was Jewish, and they would joke among themselves, like Jewish Hollywood executives. I would see agents and shit. They would joke among themselves about how like it's totally Jewish run. They would like kind of make fun of themselves or like running. It was obvious, like damn near everybody was Jewish. Like, yeah. Of course.
There's some documentaries about that, made from a Jewish perspective, that are proud of it, that say even the American idea, the idea of the American dream that was pushed out by Hollywood was one thought up by Jewish immigrants wanting a free capitalistic homeland where they could, you know, have their own language, world of opportunity behind them, you know.
I was looking for my book because that's my chapter on the Jews. Jews founded Hollywood, and it's an amazing story, but they were arch assimilationists. They wanted to be fully American. They didn't want to be seen as Jews. But their descendants then decided that being Jewish was cool. And that's who I grew up with, like the Gen Xers, who then decided that being Jewish was cool. Like the guys who founded Hollywood, like our great-grandparents' generations, they rejected Judaism and were embarrassed by it, in fact. But like Gen Xers, for whatever damn reason, and even some boomers, but certainly Gen Xers, they were the ones who went to Israel and thought it was cool, or became religious again. I've known so many people like that. So that's the problem. It's this reinvented ethnic identity to give people some sense of meaning in their lives in an atomized, you know, post-industrial society. I don't know. I mean, there is something about that. There is something about how I've seen so many Jewish Americans and some British Jews too do that, like including my mother for a while, but like many Jews I've seen get really Jewish suddenly in their 30s or 40s when they couldn't care at all before then, and suddenly have some sympathy for Israel. It's just amazing what all these fantasies can produce.
So with Julian Assange being persecuted in Britain, there's kind of an irony with Alexei Navalny.
Oh, let's do this.
Yeah. Who is Alexei Navalny? Why?
Let's do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, please, God, Jesus Christ. If I hear one more thing about Alexei Navalny. So, we know Alexei Navalny died in jail, prison. We know he was a longtime opposition, leader of the opposition, political opposition to Putin. Like, I think 2011 was the first sort of series of protests that he led. Ran for mayor of Moscow, got like a significant portion of the vote, I think around 20%. But nationally, he never got, as I understand it, more than 5%. And in the last 10 years, he's like almost a non-existent entity. I've heard from multiple actual Russians who live there that most Russians have never heard of him. He's like a minor figure. Like he's probably would be like Dennis Kucinich in the United States. You know what I mean? Like politicos would certainly know about him, but most Americans or Russians don't know about him. And he was jailed, arrested. His protests were shut down by the Russian government. Oh, yeah. Multiple times. I don't even know how many times, but you could tell me 20 or 30 or 40 and I'd believe you. Here's why. And here's what all these people who love Alexei Navalny won't tell. And that documentary that was written about him, I'm sure in collaboration with the CIA, that won the Oscar a couple of years ago. Oh, Americans know he's just this hero who just opposed the evil Putin. Yeah, what they won't tell you is that he worked for the National Endowment for Democracy, which is the front of the CIA the whole time. And we know this. And we have like video of Navalny's chief assistant deputy asking for money from a U.S. agent to conduct all sorts of operations against Putin and the government. I mean, we also know, and this is Glenn Deason, and Glenn Deason's going to be on my show next week on Unregistered. And I'm so glad to see Glenn like blowing up. He's getting tons. His videos are getting huge play now. Super brilliant international relations expert from Norway, who's on the Duran a lot. But he's written a whole scholarly article, which is the crucial thing, which is the liberal opposition in Russia that Navalny was the leader of. It was revolutionary, which is great. Cool. Like, I'm all about that. That's fine. If you want to overthrow the government, that's great. I'm all about that. Please have at it, you know. But that's what they were. Not only that, they were revolutionary, calling for the overthrow of the Russian state as it existed, as it was constituted. But they did so in collaboration with a hostile foreign government. The United States CIA, the NED, were working with Navalny and the entire liberal opposition from top to bottom. Vicky Nuland was having meetings with these people on a weekly basis. Like, they were trying to overthrow inside Russia the Russian government with the help of an adversary, hostile foreign power. Like, imagine if Russia did even 1/10 of that in the United States. Ran some candidate for president, for mayor of New York City, who then was going to run for president of the United States, whose funding is from the Russian government. And he's calling for the overthrow of the president and this Congress. Like, what do you think we would do? That's who Alexei Navalny was. Do I want him killed? No. Do I think he was killed? No. And also the strategy of this, why would he kill him now? Makes no sense. Maybe Putin is such a bloodthirsty freak that he did it because he's just that insane the way that these idiots talk about him. But strategically is the dumbest thing possible, because what happened, of course, is nothing happened, but it was used relentlessly again by the West to smear Putin, because all they did was accuse him of killing Navalny. But it doesn't, like, the important point is not even how Navalny died, it's what he was about. He was about a revolutionary movement within Russia that was funded and supported by the United States government. So that he faced any repression at all, that he was put in prison. I don't want any state to put anybody in prison, but like, what the fuck do you expect the state of Russia to do? And what would you do, United States of America, if something similar happened over here? Alexei Navalny, I wouldn't say he was like an agent of the West. I think he completely believed, I don't know, but he seemed to believe what he said. I've heard many of his followers talk about that movement in Navalny, and they're like true believers. They really believe in liberal Western democracy. They want to be part of Europe. They're not so fond of Russian nationalism and Russian culture, which totally, I'm probably more similar to them. Sure. But like, you're trying to overthrow a government from within with the help again. Like, what do you expect? This is the whole story of Western Russian relations since 1991. The West constantly trying to overthrow that government, that state. As I said, the very shape and size and power of the Russian state they want to break down and have since 91. Then the Russian state reacts in some way, and the West accuses it of, whatever, killing dissidents like Navalny or crushing popular mobilizations in the Republicans in the former Republican states. Like, I just, oh God. All right. So Navalny, it's not a fraud the way we think about it is a fraud. Like, yeah, he was repressed. I think probably less than has been said, but he was certainly repressed. He was jailed for what he was doing politically. But what I'm saying he was doing politically would get you executed in the United States, and everybody would cheer for it. And everyone would understand, because that's what a state needs to do. That's what Russian politics have been about, again, for the last 35 years. The West sending in assistance to all these subversives within Russia, some of whom are many totally true believers. I know they are absolutely, I've known some of them in St. Petersburg, especially in Moscow, who like really just want to be like cool liberal Democrat tech workers in a cool like cosmopolitan city that's very European. But they are subversive revolutionaries, and what do you think the state's going to do? So that's what's going on.
What do you make of his far right past, where he was anti-immigrant, anti-Georgian, anti-Muslim?
Yeah, I don't know enough about it, but I just know that the smartest people I've heard talk about it say that it was most likely. So he gave like, and you can still see this. He has a YouTube video channel. It's all in Russian, but you can see. I think some of it's translated somewhere. You can see his videos, right? Comparing Muslims to cockroaches and being, he's totally anti-immigration and anti-Muslim in particular. Some people have said that it was simply his attempt to appeal to the nationalists, the Russian nationalists who took those positions, to sort of widen his base of support, which didn't work. And his support dwindled from about, as I said, he got something like 20+% in Moscow in 2011, 2012-ish, to like less than 5%, like 1% of Russians support him at all now. And apparently like the working class Russians just didn't understand him at all, that he only appealed to the sort of the upper class, Europeanized, cultural elite of the big cities. So, again, though, imagine if you had like some guy, some hotshot political candidate in New York City, the biggest city, just like Moscow, who we know is working with the Russian government, and he's calling for the overthrow, essentially, of this government. I mean, that's what the liberal pro-Western movement in Russia has been about. That's Glenn Deason's whole thesis, and it's just clear. It's obvious. This is what they call for. It's obvious. And Navalny was the head of that. Oh, by the way, so he died. He was like 47, 48, something like that. How does a guy like that die? Apparently, he did have a long history of serious health issues. So I don't know. Masha Gessen, who I kind of respect, she was on Democracy Now. She works for the liberal establishment, but she's pretty damn smart, and I do have some respect for her. She's a Russian lesbian dissident, writes for the New Yorker and other places like that. But she insists that Putin did it, killed Navalny. I don't know. If you ask the guys in the fifth column, they're without even checking the evidence, they will know that Putin did it. It doesn't make any sense strategically. This made him into a martyr. It doesn't help Putin. How does this help Putin? In no way. He was already in prison. So, yeah. But the uses of Navalny is what is most important. Just look up his relationship with the NED, the National Endowment for Democracy. You guys can Google that. Just check out the headlines. If you Google it, you'll see what I'm talking about. It's a deep, long relationship between the two. And that right there is all you need to know. The NED is an arm of the CIA. We know this, has been for a long time. So, and what would any state do in response to someone like that? It's just such a fucking fraud. The whole Navalny narrative is a fraud. Not whether he was repressed. That's correct, essentially. But the narrative about it is an absolute propaganda fraud. And it's quite irritating.
Mm-hmm. And the same journalists that cheered on when Gonzalo Lira died in a Ukrainian prison haven't.
Yeah. Or don't want Assange out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Gonzalo Lira, yeah, I mean, right.
Same story as far as being a subversive dissident in somebody else's country and not being smart about your own personal safety in that case. But
yeah, right. And Gonzalo went to, and it's amazing. I mean, what's wild about the Gonzalo Lira case is that Ukraine issued the whatever it was called, the charge, like publicly. They put it out there on their own Twitter, I think, even. Like, you can see what he was charged with by the Ukrainian government puts out what it charged him with, and it says for speech. Like, because you were against the war. Mm-hmm. You called him a propagandist, I think, for Russia, or not even, just a propagandist. Okay. Like, straight up obvious free speech issue, First Amendment. And they put him in prison and basically tortured him to death for that. And the State Department, the United States, all these pro-free speech intellectual dark web journalists haven't said a fucking word about him, by the way. These people are so cared about, like Barry Weiss, the free press. We're about the free press. We're going to call it the free press while we cheer on the slaughter of children and don't mention when an American journalist gets tortured to death in prison for speech. Barry Weiss has become, I don't know, the center of a very dark web. Yeah, dark web. But it's not just her. I mean, there's a lot of people who have very, very clearly shown their allegiance to the empire because they are very pro-Israel and also either sort of turn a blind eye to Ukraine or like write sob stories about, the plight of the Ukrainian people and the evil of Vladimir Putin. This is that whole wing of the sort of dissident right. They're not dissidents, it turns out. The intellectual, the IDW, Sam Harris, Barry Weiss, Free Press. Yeah, the fifth column. I think maybe Reason Magazine too is in there too. Reason Magazine's on the precipice for me, but certainly Free Press, IDW, all those, not Rogan, but this whole intellectual dark web thing, the University of Austin, they're all working for the empire, and acting like they're rebels. Star Wars, man, they're the bad guys. They're the bad guys.
Well, I mean, it's anti-wokeness only because wokeness threatens Main Street establishment institutions that they want to maintain power, and they see, yeah,
It's what they've always fucking said.
yeah,
Jonathan Haidt, whose work is interesting and useful, and I like it in many ways. He's kind of their intellectual godfather. He has said to Jordan Peterson says this too, by the way, our mission, they say, is to save the universities. Save the universities. I would like to see them burned to the ground. Why would you want to save these things? What's to save about them? What's good? The science departments are great. Let's save that. But save? No, we want to do our own humanities and social sciences. So they're conservatives in that way, in that kind of lame way. Like, we want to save what's already here for no good reason. If you show me a good reason to save the universities, I'm for it. But these are ancient or medieval institutions. That's the university was rooted in the Middle Ages. That always serve the interests of the ruling class, like quite explicitly. That's what it's always been for. What else do you think Harvard was for? It's to train the children of the ruling class, whatever the ruling class might be. This ain't some institution of the people, never has been. It's the opposite. So Sam Harris and company, Sam Harris, the child of a very famous and wealthy Hollywood producer director, and the Weinsteins, who also are from the wealthy LA Jewish community, Fairfax. I believe they're from the Fairfax district of LA, went to Ivy League schools. They're down with the United States. They're down with the superpower. They're down with hegemony. They don't like them Muslims. They are for the empire. And that is a crucial distinction. They will side ultimately with the U.S. state. So they're on the other side. And I've said this all along. And I think people now are seeing it.
Last story, you were talking about it. Fani Willis had to testify, and as the Associated Press put it, her testimony evokes long-standing frustrations for Black women leaders. It turns out Black women are held to higher standards than everybody else, and they've been scrutinized for too long that their own personal lives and whatever sordid affairs they may have are all their own business. And, they are held to a much higher magnifying glass than your typical white male leaders who are allowed to do anything.
So, I watched the testimony. I think it was last Friday. So it's a little bit dated, but, I got so excited when I was watching it. I almost texted you and said, we have to talk about this on the show. But it is such a complicated, complex, I would say, text, her testimony. And it really is a text. It's just stunning. I think it's 2 hours. Just her testimony, defending herself against the charge by Trump's lawyers that she had a romantic and sexual relationship with a guy who she then appointed as the lead prosecutor in the case against Trump, and then had him paid, I think, $600,000 for that job. Conflict of interest, total corruption. I'm sure she did it. I don't have any doubt, really, that she did it. She tried to fuck with the timeline to make it look like they started fucking after she hired him, but it was like, even according to her, it was just a few months later. And I'm like, really? And they talked about taking trips together before then. So the entire right wing, all they want to say, and they're 100% right about this, but all they want to say is, oh, she's corrupt. She's a hustler. She's, has no principles, and this whole thing was corrupt from the get-go. And yes, correct. Yes, no, she's a scam art. I mean, she's a hustler, grifter, liar, 100%. She lies multiple times. You can see her lying. multiple times where it's obvious she's lying or fudging things. But there's something about and I still haven't totally sorted this out of my mind. And Hotep Jesus talked about it a bit on his show, and he also was kind of struggling with it because he and I think, sort of saw it in the same way, that the right wing was so focused on just the political importance of it. And they're right about that. But they're missing this incredible demonstration of, here it is, of the very, very, very different cultures that are at work in now formal institutions in America. There is a Black working class culture that has made its way into places like the district attorney's office in Fulton County, Georgia, which is where Atlanta is, one of the major cities. Like, this woman is I kept like saying to myself, this woman is the district attorney for Fulton County, for Atlanta. She's the lead prosecutor for the whole county, for Atlanta. Educated entirely at HBCUs. Her dad was a Black Panther, apparently, back in the day. Grew up in Inglewood, South LA, and then Washington, D.C., I think in the hood, somewhere in Southeast, I think. Just real black working class, like, with all the signifiers, including the eyelashes. The district attorney for Fulton County, Georgia, wears fake eyelashes. And I want to talk about that because that is the whole story. Like, it's just, and that is now allowed. And I'm still trying to figure out what this means, but this is a massive shift in American culture.
Well, that's the center of her argument, is that she paid out of pocket her own money for these trips, not using state funds, and she paid using cash because everybody knows Black people use cash for everything. It's
no, Michael. No, Black people have 6 months of worth of cash at all times in their house. Didn't you know that?
Because they're like Jews anticipating the next pogrom, having like piles of cash.
Also, Black people are well known for having 6 months worth of cash.
Yeah.
We know the statistics, guys. We know how little money you have. In fact, you're the ones who tell us about this all the time, how poor you are. You don't ever have 6 months worth of cash available. Mm-hmm. No one does, but certainly not Black people. No, and she invented this whole folklore, this Black folklore with her dad too. Put him on the stand as well, mm-hmm. And he says, "Well, it's a Black thing. Every Black person I know does this." I'm like, no, they don't, because they don't have that money.
And when asked, where did you get the cash from, I believe she said, "My blood, sweat, and tears."
So, okay. Here's what I want the right wing to think about. Y'all are right, 100% right. This bitch fucked you over. She's corrupt as shit. She gave her boyfriend this job so they could get a bunch of money and go on fancy vacations, which we heard all about. And I loved how she would, like, her defense, her defense was to tell you in great detail what she did on these vacations. Like, she told you about the appetizer and the entree and the drinks they had and the beach they walked on and the movie they went to. God, it was amazing. Someone on MSNBC, I think it was Joy Reid, or someone on Joy Reid, said it was a clinic. I swear to God, this was the line. It was a clinic in Black womanhood. Mm-hmm. So, here's what I would like the right wing to think about. Fani Willis works for the government. She's worked for the government her whole career. The HBCUs are all funded. I don't know if people know this. They're all like mostly funded by the federal government. Most of their money comes from the feds. HBCUs are completely held afloat by federal tax money. So she's been a ward of the state her whole life, and she's been working the government angle. Now, if the government is going to put out this whole fucking apparatus for you and say, if you pass this test and do this for us and go through this hoop, we're going to give you this salary. And she talked about her salary too. I love that. She said at one point, you want to make $200,000+ a year. She was very specific, so non-bourgeois. Like, that's not a bourgeois thing. You don't talk about how much money you make. So many fascinating things in this interview. The government says, okay, black women, you're going to work in the post office. You're going to work in the schools. You're going to work in maybe, as a clerk in the law, in the offices, in the courts, whatever. And you're going to get this salary, that salary, if you just keep going up the ladder. And then you're going to get a pension. And all you got to do is say what we want you to say. Now, black woman from the hood, why would she give a fuck about America and justice and the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and Thomas Jefferson and what this government means and this country means? No, she's cynical. She's a hustler. As she should be. As she should be. These motherfuckers put all this money in front of her and said, all you got to do is talk the talk. We'll pay you. And she said, okay, I'll talk the talk and get paid and take vacations with my boyfriend in the Bahamas. That's what I saw. Now, do you want to indict the stupid, uneducated black woman for this? Fine. Have fun with that. Cool. But maybe think instead about the system all around her that created all these incentives to do all these things that she just did that you hate. If you didn't have a government system of patronage of black people in which black people are basically made wards of the state. And by the way, I'm sorry to say this, the vast majority of black professionals in this country work for the government. They work in public sector jobs, like the vast majority. And she's one of them. We want them to believe in the government as some sort of like divine institution, like white people think about it as America. Of course they don't, for obvious reasons. Do I need to spell that out? So they just get paid. They're like, oh, now we decided we love black people. We're going to pay you instead of enslave you and segregate you and exploit you. Oh, now we're going to like celebrate you, make us our tokens and give you a bunch of money for it. You just got to walk the walk and talk the talk for us. The cynicism of black people who do this kind of shit is completely understandable. Like, she's not a hero, but is that not what you would do if you lived in the Soviet Union and they were like, hey, you can either live in the ghetto in a shitty ass apartment with no prospects for anything, or you can take this bureaucratic job in the government for us and we'll pay you well and you can have a nice dacha in the summers and a nice apartment in downtown Moscow. And you're going to talk about communism and how great communism is. You don't give a fuck about communism, but it's the same thing. Indict the system of liberal white patronage that gave these people incentives to do this kind of thing, not the people themselves. But also look at it as an amazing document about what black working class culture is really about, man. And there's a lot actually to emulate in there. Even though of course, she's a tool of the Democratic Party. But think about why. But yeah, I strongly recommend watching that 2 hours of the Fani Willis testimony. It's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. And it seems like these diversity appointments are the only people with the hubris to take on Trump in these shady legal cases. And they also seem like they're set up to be the fall people if anything goes wrong. Like, yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Well, who else would you put out there? You spend your whole life like pumping up these black kids in these colleges, Ivy League colleges. You can be great. You can be in the Supreme Court. You can be a prosecutor. You can take down the racists. Go. You're our heroes. And you send them out there and they're like, because they're diversity hires, they're too dumb to do it right. They fuck it up, as Fani Willis and Alvin Bragg have done. And they get all the backlash, and all the white liberals who created them are protected. All right, this right-wing conspiracy show will end on that note. I was about to talk about the Jews who actually supported those black kids in those colleges, but I won't do that because we're going to end the show. If you want to hang out and talk about
Jews.
Well, I mean, specifically the Zionist occupation. What is it called? Government?
Zog, yeah.
Specifically, tonight's topic will be Zog. We're bringing in some special guests who will be, you won't be able to see their face for various reasons. But yeah, it'll be good. So patreon.com/unregistered, that gets you access, if you become a patron at any level, to Unregistered Live, which is where Michael and I are going right now to hang out. It's a Zoom meeting. You can be totally anonymous. You can totally hide your face. We don't have to know you're there at all. Or you can come and like show your face and yell at me. But do that. Go to patreon.com/unregistered. Support this show, Unregistered, and have a good time. So, Michael, thank you, dude.
Nope. Yeah.
It was good.
See ya.
From the river to the sea. Peace.
Peace.